My sister wanted to search my phone before her wedding. I refused and backed out. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and until recently I was extremely close with my older sister, who's 30. She's getting married in a few weeks to a man she has been with for about 5 years. Long before they started dating, he and I worked together at the same engineering firm for almost 3 years. We were good co-workers, often had lunch with a group from the office, helped each other with projects, and occasionally messaged outside of work about deadlines, presentations, or office gossip. There was never any flirting, dating, or romantic interest between us. When my sister first found out we already knew each other, she thought it was funny. She even joked that I should tell her any embarrassing stories about him from work. Everything stayed perfectly normal until recently. She called me in tears after finding some old messages between him and me from years before they had even met. One message from him said, "Missed having you around today," and I had replied something like, "Wish you'd been at work today too." The context was that we usually worked on the same projects and covered for each other whenever one of us was away. The rest of the conversation history was almost entirely work questions, memes, office complaints, and him thanking me for helping him prepare for a presentation. She asked whether I had ever had feelings for him. I told her no, because I genuinely never did. Then she asked if I would let her go through my old phone backups, archived messages, and social media accounts so she could see the full conversations and reassure herself that nothing had ever happened. At first I laughed because I honestly thought she was kidding. When I realized she was serious, I told her absolutely not. It wasn't because I had anything to hide. I just thought it was a ridiculous invasion of my privacy. I even suggested that if she had doubts, she should ask her fiancé to show her his own phone instead of demanding access to mine. She refused. Her reasoning was that she didn't want him to think she distrusted him. Instead, she kept insisting that if I had nothing to hide, I should have no problem proving it. Apparently several of her friends agreed and told her this would prevent any future drama before the wedding. The more she pushed, the more frustrated I became. I couldn't understand why I was the one expected to surrender years of private conversations while the person she was actually marrying wasn't being asked to do the same. Then she told me she no longer felt comfortable having me at the wedding unless I handed over my phone first so everything could be settled once and for all. That was my breaking point. I told her I wouldn't be attending the wedding at all. If she truly believed someone needed to prove they're innocent, she could start with the man she was about to marry instead of demanding access to my private life. Now my mother says I'm letting my pride get in the way over something small, while my sister insists I'm making myself look guilty by refusing. Was I wrong for walking away instead of letting her search my phone? Would I be wrong for asking my daughter's boyfriend not to join our meals? My daughter, who is 22, has been dating her boyfriend, who is 25, for a little over 2 years, and the relationship is serious enough that he comes around our home often. He grew up in the United Kingdom, though his family is originally from Guatemala, and he has a very unusual habit that has started to drive me crazy. He seems to have a real fear of being seen eating in front of other people. I have never once watched him actually take a bite of food, even though we have spent plenty of time together as a family. He is slim and doesn't look unhealthy, but whenever we eat together he always orders a full meal or accepts a plate, then just moves the food around, cuts it into pieces, and makes it look like he has eaten when he really hasn't. Afterward, he either gives the food away or throws it out. The problem is that we occasionally take them out for dinner on birthdays or holidays, and he does the same thing at restaurants. He orders something expensive, barely touches it, and the whole thing ends up wasted. It's even worse at home, because I make extra effort to cook for everyone, and then he ends up scraping the untouched food straight into the trash. It feels horribly wasteful, especially when food prices are so high. It has also become awkward in public because waiters keep checking on him, asking whether something is wrong with the food or if he wants to reorder. I've tried talking to my daughter privately and told her that I don't mind if he doesn't want to eat, but he needs to stop accepting full plates and ordering restaurant meals if he is not actually going to touch them. She told me it is a cultural issue and that in his family it would be rude to refuse food, so she's not asking him to stop accepting it. I understand that, but I still feel frustrated because it seems disrespectful for us to keep paying for meals that he has no intention of eating. At this point I'm wondering whether I would be out of line if I simply told him he is no longer invited to family meals at all. I told my husband I hope our sons never grow up like him. Was out of line. I'm a 40-year-old mother of 3 boys, and while I love my husband, one thing has always frustrated me about him. He was raised with a very old school mentality that men should never cry, never talk about their feelings, and always be tough. Any display of emotion is, in his opinion, a sign of weakness. Over the years, I've watched that attitude influence our oldest son, who is now 16. When he was little, he was affectionate and would tell me everything. As he got older, especially after starting high school, he became much more guarded. He spends most of his time playing rugby, hanging out with friends, and keeping everything bottled up. It feels like he stopped letting anyone see how he really feels. A few months ago, he started dating another boy from one of his sports teams. It was his first serious relationship, and he seemed genuinely happy. Then, over the past week, I noticed he was quieter than usual. He kept insisting everything was fine, but I could tell something was wrong. Eventually, I sat down with him and gently asked what had happened. He finally broke down in tears and told me they had split up because his boyfriend had pressured him into something he wasn't ready for and then cheated on him when he refused. For the first time in years, he let himself be vulnerable. He rested his head on my lap like he used to when he was little, cried, and talked through everything he had been holding inside. I didn't interrupt him or try to fix it. I just listened and comforted him. Then my husband came home early. He walked into the room, saw our son crying, and immediately asked what all the fuss was about. When I explained they had broken up, he rolled his eyes and said our son needed to stop crying over some stupid teenage romance because boys shouldn't fall apart over things like that. The moment changed instantly. My son wiped his face, apologized, mumbled that he was fine, and rushed upstairs to his bedroom. I was furious. I told my husband that he had just destroyed one of the few moments where our son actually felt safe enough to open up. Instead of showing even a little compassion, he had embarrassed him for having emotions. He doubled down and said boys need to learn to toughen up because that's how men deal with life. That's when I lost my temper. I shouted that I hoped none of our sons ever grew up to be emotionally closed off the way he is. The look on his face changed immediately. He looked genuinely hurt, and we barely spoke for the rest of the evening. Things have been tense ever since. My sister agrees that my husband handled the situation terribly, but she also thinks I crossed the line by saying I hoped our children never turned out like him. I don't regret defending my son, but I do wonder if what I said in anger went too far. Was I wrong? Was I wrong to stay at the show after my friend wanted to leave? I'm a 32-year-old woman, and recently my husband and I went to a big concert in Chicago for an artist we both love. The tickets were hard to get, and we had planned the night as part of our anniversary celebration. A friend of ours, Mara, who lives in another province, asked if we could buy her a ticket too because she wanted to fly in and join us. Another mutual friend, Elise, decided to come as well even though she was not especially interested in the performer. We said yes to both of them and managed to get seats for all four of us. Mara had a toddler about 2 years ago, and this was the first time she had ever spent the night away from her child. She stayed at our place the evening before the concert and was clearly struggling with it. She cried a lot, kept video calling her husband, and seemed panicked whenever she stopped talking about the baby. We tried to reassure her and eventually convinced her to get some sleep, but even the next day she still seemed unsure about whether she should go. By the time we arrived at the arena, Mara was visibly overwhelmed. The crowd, the noise, the heat, and the fact that her phone service was unreliable all seemed to make things worse. Elise stayed with her through much of it, even leaving the seats to sit with her in the bathroom and try to calm her down. My husband and I checked on them a couple of times, but we mostly stayed in our seats because we didn't want to miss the concert. About halfway through, Mara said she wanted to leave. Elise offered to take her back to our place, and they left together. My husband and I decided to stay and finish the concert since we had paid for the tickets and had been looking forward to it for months. Later, Mara was upset that we hadn't all left with her, and word somehow got around to other friends. Some of them think I should have gone home too, especially since she was clearly having a hard time. I told them that Mara knew this was her first night away and should not have come if she wasn't prepared for it, and that my life does not revolve around other people's children. Now I'm wondering whether I was selfish for staying at the concert and for saying that in response. Was I wrong for not defending my wife after she insulted my sister? My younger sister is 29 and recently came over to visit my wife and me. Before I get into what happened, there is some background that matters. Several years ago, my sister became pregnant while she was dating her boyfriend. When she told him, he immediately suggested they get married before the baby was born. She turned him down because she felt they were not compatible long term. She never went into much detail, and I have always respected that it was her decision. They ended the relationship but have done an impressive job raising their now 6-year-old son together. They split custody equally, both have stable careers, live close enough to make co-parenting easy, and genuinely seem to put their son first. They are no longer together, but they work well as parents. The problem is that my wife has never accepted my sister's decision. She believes they should have gotten married and often criticizes my sister for referring to her former boyfriend as her son's father instead of using more formal language. Almost every time they see each other, my wife brings up the idea that my sister should ask him to give their relationship another chance or convince him to marry her. My sister has repeatedly said she is not interested. Eventually, my sister privately asked me to speak with my wife because she was tired of hearing the same comments every visit. I did talk to my wife and asked her to let the subject go, but it clearly did not stick. During my sister's latest visit, everything started off pleasantly. We were talking about her son's upcoming first year of elementary school and how she was getting him ready for the transition. Out of nowhere, my wife once again told my sister that she should just go to the courthouse and marry her former boyfriend. She said that her parents would think less of her if she stayed unmarried and that people would see her son as coming from a broken family. Before I could step in, my sister completely lost her patience. She fired back that my wife should stop worrying about someone else's relationship and spend more time worrying about her own health. She made several cruel comments about my wife's weight, saying she should focus on losing a large amount instead of judging other people, and adding that no wedding ring could hide her appearance. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. My wife has always been sensitive about her weight, and as soon as my sister left, she burst into tears. Then she asked why I had not defended her. I told her honestly that while I thought my sister's comments about her appearance were unnecessarily harsh, I also believed my wife had crossed a major line first. She had repeatedly ignored my sister's boundaries for years, insulted her parenting choices, implied her son would be judged because his parents were never married, and refused to let the issue go despite being asked many times. Now my wife is barely speaking to me because she believes I should have immediately defended her no matter what she said first. I feel like my sister's reaction was harsh, but it did not come out of nowhere after years of being criticized over the same issue. Was I wrong for refusing to take my wife's side? Were we wrong for leaving after my friend's parents wouldn't let us share a room? My boyfriend and I are both in our early 20s and have been together for almost 6 years. We started dating in high school, recently moved into our first apartment together after I finished university, and plan to get married once he completes his graduate program. One of our old classmates invited us to spend a long holiday weekend at his family's lake house. We happily accepted because we had not seen him in quite a while and thought it would be a fun trip. When we arrived on Friday, we realized his parents were also staying there for the weekend. That was completely fine with us since it was their home. They were friendly, welcomed everyone, and mostly let us do our own thing during the day. That evening we all sat outside together, had a few drinks, and everything seemed to be going really well. Later that night, as my boyfriend and I were getting ready for bed, our friend's mother quietly pulled me aside. She explained that because we were not married, my boyfriend would not be allowed to sleep in the guest room with me. Instead, she expected him to spend the night on the living room couch. I was caught completely off guard because our friend had never mentioned this rule beforehand. My boyfriend and I already lived together, so it felt especially strange to us. I did not argue with her because it was her house, but the situation immediately became uncomfortable. I have always struggled sleeping somewhere unfamiliar, and sharing a room with my boyfriend makes those nights much easier. He also was not thrilled about spending 2 nights on a worn-out couch while there was an empty bed available. Rather than complain or ignore their rules, we decided the simplest solution was to book a hotel nearby and stay there instead. We told our friend we appreciated the invitation, but were going to get a room in town and would meet up with everyone the following morning. He seemed surprised but said it was our decision, so we left. The next morning we called him to figure out our plans for the day, but he sounded irritated. He told us his parents were furious after we left because they felt we had rejected their hospitality by checking into our hotel instead of following their rules. Since everything had become awkward, we spent the rest of the weekend exploring the area on our own and never ended up seeing our friend again. A couple of days later, he sent us a message saying we had embarrassed him in front of his parents. He argued that we should have just slept in separate rooms for 2 nights to keep the peace. He also said we were no longer invited to the annual holiday dinner he hosts for our old group of friends because he was still upset about how we handled everything. From our perspective, we respected his parents' rules by not staying in their house. We never argued, never snuck into the same room, and never criticized them. We simply paid for our own hotel because we were more comfortable that way. Now our friend says we were rude and made his family feel disrespected. Were we wrong for leaving instead of staying under their rules? Was I wrong for crocheting at my usual bar during a big soccer match? I have a neighborhood sports bar that I visit several times a week. I usually bring my crochet project, order a few beers, relax for a couple of hours, and head home. I've been going there for so long that the bartenders know my usual order and often have my drink ready before I even settle onto a stool. I always tip well and I've never had any issues with the staff. I know it's a sports bar, but I have never really been interested in watching games. Most afternoons when I go, there isn't much happening anyway, so I quietly work on my crochet while enjoying a drink. The other day happened to be during a major international soccer match featuring the United States. I arrived in the late afternoon like I normally do, grabbed my regular seat at the bar, ordered a beer, and started crocheting while the game played on the televisions around me. Everything was completely normal until the United States scored. Everyone around me erupted in celebration, but I simply kept working on my project because I wasn't following the match. A man a few seats away suddenly started yelling at me, asking why I wasn't cheering. Then he accused me of wasting a seat at the bar because I was sitting in front of one of the televisions without actually watching the game. The thing is, I sit in that same area all the time. The bartenders have never cared that I crochet instead of watching sports, and there were multiple televisions throughout the bar with plenty of places for people to watch the match. I told the man to leave me alone. The bartender looked over to see what was happening, and I tried to signal that I wasn't looking for a confrontation. Instead of dropping it, the man kept arguing and continued complaining about me being there. After seeing him continue to harass me, the bartender asked him to leave. His friends weren't happy about it. They argued that I should have been the one asked to leave because I wasn't even watching the game. The bartender shut that down immediately, pointing out that I'm a regular customer who wasn't bothering anyone, while their friend was the one creating a scene. The rest of the evening was peaceful, although his friends spent a while grumbling about how someone who wasn't interested in soccer shouldn't be sitting at the bar during such an important match. Later that night, one of the owners actually sent me a message saying the man had been told not to return for the remainder of the tournament because of his behavior. There are plenty of televisions throughout the building, so it's not as though I was preventing anyone from seeing the game. I never complained about the match being on, never asked anyone to lower the volume, and never bothered anyone. I simply sat in my usual spot, supported a local business like I always do, and worked on my crochet while having a few drinks. Was I wrong for using my regular seat at the bar even though I wasn't there to watch the game? Would I be wrong for suggesting my sister-in-law get help for her son? About 3 years ago, my husband's younger sister became a first-time mother, and everyone in the family adored her little boy. I studied speech therapy years ago and even worked in the field for a while before changing careers. Even though I no longer practice, I still recognize many of the signs of delayed speech development. As my nephew grew older, I started noticing that his speech was developing more slowly than I would normally expect. At first, I kept my concerns to myself because I knew my sister-in-law was incredibly protective of her son and struggled with any criticism, no matter how well-intentioned. She had even asked his daycare to stop sending developmental reports because they made her anxious. By the time he turned 3, I felt the situation had become harder to ignore. Early support can make a huge difference for children with speech delays, and I worried that every month without help could make things more difficult later. I did not want to embarrass her in front of the family, so I sent her a private message. I carefully explained that I had not worked as speech therapy for several years and was not trying to diagnose anything. I simply mentioned that I had noticed a few speech patterns that might be worth discussing with a currently practicing speech therapist. I told her I only wanted to make sure her son had every opportunity to succeed. Her response was immediate. She told me never to speak to her about her son again, then blocked me on every social media account we shared. The situation quickly spread through the family. My husband was frustrated that I had said anything at all because he worried it would damage his relationship with his sister. Several relatives agreed that I had crossed a line and pressured me into apologizing just to keep the peace. At the time, I felt terrible and apologized because I hated the idea of causing conflict. Since then, I have spent a lot of time thinking about what happened and even discussed it with a counselor. Looking back, I still believe my intentions were to help, not criticize. I never claimed to be diagnosing her child, only encouraging her to seek an evaluation from someone currently working in the profession. I also believed a private message was the most respectful way to bring it up because we rarely spend time alone, and she had recently posted about her son, making it feel like an appropriate opportunity to respond discreetly. For some additional context, my husband never wanted to be involved because any concern coming from him would have obviously come from me anyway. My sister-in-law and I had always gotten along before this happened, and I genuinely think she is a caring mother who loves her son deeply. I only spoke up because I had reason to believe no assessment or intervention had been considered, and I worried that waiting longer could make things harder for him. Even after everything that happened, I still wonder whether I should have stayed silent or whether trying to help a child was the right thing to do, even if it damaged my relationship with his mother. Was I wrong for ending a family birthday tradition that only I kept alive? I'm 30 years old, and for the past 6 years I've been the one organising my mother's birthday celebration every single year. It started as something I genuinely wanted to do because my mum has always done so much for our family. Over time, though, it became far more than simply hosting a dinner. Every year I deep cleaned my house, rearranged furniture, borrowed extra tables and chairs from neighbours, planned the entire menu, shopped for all the groceries, cooked every dish, baked her birthday cake from scratch, coordinated everyone's arrival times, made sure my grandmother had transportation, and then stayed up late washing dishes and cleaning after everyone had gone home. At first, I didn't mind because seeing my mom happy made it feel worthwhile. Eventually, though, everyone started acting as though the celebration simply happened on its own. My brother would arrive carrying a bouquet of flowers, take a few family photos, post them online with captions about celebrating mom, and everyone praised him for being so thoughtful. My father would compliment me by saying I made everything look effortless, then relax for the rest of the evening while I rushed between the kitchen and the dining room. By the end of the night, everyone had gone home while I was still packing leftovers, scrubbing pans, and putting my house back together. This year I finally decided I didn't want to shoulder the entire responsibility alone anymore. In our family group chat, I said I'd still love to celebrate Mom's birthday, but I wasn't willing to host and prepare the entire meal by myself again. I suggested we either reserve a table at a restaurant or make it a shared meal where everyone contributed a dish. No one responded for a couple of days. Then my brother sent me a message asking if I was seriously refusing to do Mom's birthday this year. I told him I wasn't refusing to celebrate her. I was simply refusing to keep doing everyone else's part while they took credit for showing up. That didn't go over well. My dad accused me of making the day all about myself. My brother claimed I was punishing our mother because I wanted recognition. Then my mom quietly told me she was disappointed because she had always thought preparing a birthday dinner was something special that we shared together. That comment hurt because, from my perspective, it had never really been something we shared. I was the one carrying the workload while everyone else enjoyed the results. I still attended the birthday gathering. I brought my mom flowers, gave her a hug, spent time with everyone, and celebrated with the family. The only difference was that I arrived as a guest instead of the unpaid event planner, chef, baker, decorator, and cleanup crew. Now my family says I embarrassed everyone by refusing to continue the tradition and that I spoiled what had always been a meaningful family celebration. Was I wrong for stepping away after years of doing everything by myself? Was I wrong for not driving to get my daughter after she ignored every message? My daughter is 22 and has been living on campus while taking summer classes so she can stay on track to graduate. She has been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and depression, and while she's received treatment in the past, one challenge has never really improved. She almost never responds to calls or messages. If you need an answer from her, you're honestly more likely to get one by showing up in person than by sending a dozen texts. It's been an ongoing issue for years. When she first left for university, the adjustment was difficult. She struggled to keep up with assignments, nearly failed several classes, and only managed to turn things around after experiencing the consequences firsthand. Since then, she's done much better academically, but her communication habits have stayed exactly the same. Last week, my mother passed away. My daughter and her grandmother were very close, so I knew she would want the chance to say goodbye at the visitation. As soon as we learned the funeral arrangements, I called her several times, left voicemail messages, and sent multiple texts explaining what had happened and letting her know I would drive to pick her up if she wanted to come home. None of the calls were answered, and every message remained unread. I even asked her brothers to reach out, thinking maybe she'd respond to them instead. They had no better luck than I did. The university is about a 5-hour drive from our house. That would have meant driving there, trying to find her somewhere on campus without knowing where she was, convincing her to come home, and then driving another 5 hours back. My wife and I talked it over while trying to prepare for my mother's visitation. She felt the same way I did. We were grieving, overwhelmed with funeral arrangements, and exhausted from years of chasing our daughter down whenever she decided to disappear from her phone. We agreed that this time we couldn't put everything on hold to track her down in person. I continued trying to call and text over the next few days, but I never heard anything from her. The visitation came and went without her there. A couple of days later, she finally opened her messages. She immediately called me in tears after realizing what had happened. She was devastated that she had missed her grandmother's funeral and blamed me for not driving to get her anyway. She said I should have known she would have wanted to be there regardless of whether she answered her phone. I told her that we had done everything we reasonably could to reach her. I reminded her that this has been an ongoing problem for years and that we simply couldn't spend an entire day driving across the state while planning a funeral and grieving, especially after receiving no response from her or any indication that she even knew what was happening. She insists I should have come for her anyway because this was different. I feel terrible that she missed the chance to say goodbye to someone she loved, but I also feel like there comes a point where an adult has to take responsibility for being reachable, especially when their family is trying desperately to contact them. So, was I wrong for not driving to bring my daughter home after she ignored every call and message? Was I wrong for refusing to leave my adopted son out at a family trip? My wife and I are both 46, and together we're raising 4 children. Our oldest is 20, our youngest is 12, and we have 2 19-year-old sons. One of those sons came into our lives under heartbreaking circumstances. My closest friend, who I considered more like a brother than a friend, passed away unexpectedly when his son was 8 years old. He was raising a son alone, and after his death my wife and I became his legal guardians. There were many reasons why that happened, but those are deeply personal to him, so I won't share them. From that day forward, he became part of our family. I've always made sure he knows who his biological father was, and we honor my friend's memory often. At the same time, he calls me dad, my wife mom, and our other children have always treated him as a brother. Raising him wasn't always easy because of everything he had been through, but watching him grow into the young man he is today has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. Years before that happened, my wife and I briefly separated after our oldest son was born. We weren't married yet, and the stress of becoming new parents took a toll on us. During that separation, I briefly dated another woman. It wasn't a serious relationship, and we lost contact after only a short time. I had no idea she was married. A few months ago, I received a message through a DNA ancestry website from a 19-year-old named Owen. He had taken a DNA test after discovering inconsistencies in his family history, and it turned out I was his biological father. His mother had believed her husband was his father all these years, so this came as a surprise to everyone involved. Since then, my wife and I have welcomed him into our family. We're still getting to know each other and figuring out what our relationship looks like, but he's a wonderful young man, and I'm grateful we've had the opportunity to build a connection. The problem is that he doesn't seem to accept my adopted son as part of the family. My adopted son has no idea there's any tension, but I've started noticing comments that concern me. Recently, Owen asked if I would go on a camping trip with him and my oldest son. I loved the idea and immediately agreed. I also naturally said that my adopted son should come too because, in my mind, it was a trip for my son. That's when everything changed. Owen became frustrated and said my adopted son didn't need to be included in everything. He then told me it would be nice if I spent time with my real sons for once. That comment hit me hard. I told him that my adopted son is every bit as much my child as my biological sons are. Biology doesn't determine who belongs in my family. I explained that if we were taking a father and son trip, then all of my sons would be invited. He argued that I was choosing my adopted son over him and accused me of loving the son I raised more than the son I had only recently discovered. I told him it wasn't about choosing one child over another. It was about refusing to exclude one of my children simply because we don't share DNA. I said that if my adopted son wasn't welcome, then I wasn't interested in taking the trip at all. Now Owen says I'm pushing him away after missing almost 2 decades of his life, and a few relatives think I should have accepted his request because he's still adjusting to suddenly finding out who his biological father is. I understand this situation is incredibly emotional for him, and I know he's trying to figure out where he fits into our family. At the same time, I don't believe building a relationship with one son should come at the expense of another. Was I wrong for refusing to leave one of my children behind? Was I wrong for telling my brother his guilt isn't my responsibility? My husband and I are both 34 and have 4 children who range in age from 2 to 8 years old. Growing up, I struggled with my weight for most of my childhood. There are several relatives on my side of the family who are genetically prone to weight problems, and I also have autism, which made things even harder because I relied heavily on processed foods and was extremely selective about what I would eat. Those experiences stayed with me. Long before I became a parent, I promised myself that if I had children, I would teach them healthy eating habits from the beginning. I never wanted them to go through the same struggles I did. That doesn't mean our home has strict food rules. Our kids eat plenty of fruits, vegetables, whole foods, and balanced meals, but we also enjoy dessert after dinner most nights, order takeout once a week, and don't police what they eat at birthday parties, school events, or other people's homes. We focus on moderation instead of restriction, and our children genuinely enjoy the meals we make. They don't feel deprived, and we don't criticize other parents for feeding their families differently. Recently, my brother and I argued over something completely unrelated. He was upset that my family could afford 2 vacations this summer, while his family couldn't. I reminded him that I had offered more than once to pay for his family to join us, but he turned me down. Even though we moved past the argument on the surface, he's still been making little comments toward me ever since. Earlier today, several members of our family met for lunch before driving together to a relative's wedding. Since we were already going to an expensive reception later that evening, I packed lunches for my children. It also guaranteed they'd eat food I knew they liked. Before we left home, I even asked whether they wanted fast food instead, but they chose the lunches I packed because they happened to be their favorite. Meanwhile, my siblings bought meals from a nearby burger restaurant for their children. Nobody seemed bothered by any of it until my brother pulled me aside. He accused me of deliberately making the rest of the family look like bad parents by giving my children homemade lunches instead of buying fast food. He claimed my parenting choices were just another way of showing everyone that I thought I was better than they were, and said I was constantly trying to make people feel guilty. At that point, I had enough. I told him that if my family's eating habits made him feel guilty, that wasn't my responsibility to fix. I've never criticized how he feeds his children, and I've never told anyone else how they should parent. The only reason we're intentional about food is because of my own experiences growing up and the health issues that run in our family. After that, I walked away because I wasn't interested in having the same argument again. Now my brother says I was dismissive and arrogant, while a couple of relatives think I should have tried to reassure him instead of ending the conversation. From my perspective, I wasn't judging anyone. I was simply feeding my own children the way my husband and I believe is best for them. Was I wrong for telling my brother that his feelings about my parenting choices are my responsibility? Should I still treat my son's former wife like family? My son was married to his former wife, who I'll call Natalie, for almost a decade before they divorced earlier this year. Natalie had an incredibly difficult upbringing. She moved between different homes throughout her childhood and never really had a stable family. When she married my son, she became very close with all of us. I treated her like another daughter and tried to give her the support she had missed growing up. Unfortunately, their marriage fell apart after years of struggling with infertility. They experienced 2 pregnancy losses, and the emotional strain slowly destroyed their relationship. By the end, the divorce became very bitter, with both of them saying and doing things they regretted. My son has since started seeing someone else. As for Natalie, I have no idea whether she is dating anyone. After the divorce, I naturally stepped back from my relationship with her. She is no longer invited to birthdays, graduations, or other family gatherings. I also stopped calling and messaging her because I felt that was the appropriate boundary after the marriage ended. A few days ago, Natalie called me and asked if she had done something wrong because she noticed she was no longer included in family events. I told her she had not done anything new, but that she and my son were no longer married, and I did not think it was appropriate for me to continue having the same relationship with one of my children's former spouses. She responded by saying my son never had to know if we stayed in contact. I told her that he absolutely would not be comfortable with that, especially considering how ugly the divorce became, and I was not interested in hiding a relationship from my own son. She became emotional and said I was abandoning her. She reminded me that she has no real family of her own and that we were all she had. I felt sympathetic, but I also told her that her lack of relatives was not something I could fix. Once the marriage ended, she was no longer part of our family, and I was not going to continue acting as though nothing had changed. That upset her even more. She called me a horrible person before hanging up. My relatives all think it was strange that she expected to maintain a close relationship with me after divorcing my son. They believe that once a marriage ends, it is normal for each person to move on with their own life. For some extra context, my son was not the one who ended the marriage. Natalie filed for divorce herself. He came home one day to divorce papers and was told he needed to leave the house. The separation was extremely painful for both of them, and by the end neither wanted anything to do with the other. Even knowing all of that, I still wonder if I was too harsh when I told her that not having a family anymore was not my responsibility. Was I wrong? Was I wrong for refusing to be in the bridal party? I'm a 29-year-old woman, and I've known my best friend since elementary school. Because we grew up together, I became very close to her family over the years, and I am still invited to their holidays, birthdays, and summer barbecues like I'm one of their own. Her younger brother, who is now getting married, has also known me for most of his life. He is engaged to a woman named Talia, and she has a reputation in the family for being unpleasant toward women. She is very friendly with men, constantly fishes for their attention, and tends to make little digs at other women to make herself look better. Most of the women in the family can't stand her, and even her future mother-in-law has had a hard time dealing with her behavior. My best friend avoids her whenever possible, and I have seen enough of her attitude myself to understand why. The problem started when Talia was trying to fill out the bridal party. She only had 1 attendant and needed 2 more to match the number of men standing on her fiancé's side. She asked my best friend first, and then kept struggling to find anyone else because, as she kept putting it, women were being difficult. From where I stood, the real issue was that she had alienated nearly every woman around her. Eventually, she called me and asked if I would join the bridal party. I said no politely and assumed that would be the end of it. It was not. She later called my husband to try again, and when he handed me the phone, we ended up arguing for several minutes. She kept insisting I should do it just to help her out, even though she had done nothing to build any kind of relationship with me. At that point I lost my patience and told her that her lack of female friends was not my problem. I hung up soon after. Now her fiancé wants me to apologize. My best friend's family is divided, and the whole thing has turned into a huge mess. My best friend's mother told me not to worry because this blow-up was going to happen eventually anyway, but I'm still being told I was rude. Was I wrong for refusing to be in the bridal party and saying what I did when she pushed me too far?